Welcome to Bottle Rocket with Elena Sucheva, your top hockey podcast. Welcome back to Bottle Rocket. I'm Elena and joined by Maeve today, and Teabag is joining us shortly. We're very happy to be joined by Steve Simmons, longtime Toronto sports columnist. Steve, great to have you with us.
Very happy to be here.
I have to, as a fellow journalist, and I've said this many times, your stuff is the best there is on the continent, but I want to know how long does it take you to write the column that I read today, which was had a just ton of stuff. How long does that take?
The actual writing of it doesn't take that long. It's the gathering that takes very long, and I kind of look at it as a full week of work. So I start, say, on the Monday, gathering items and things and information, and in today's world of you're able to text people and get instant answers to things that would have taken a lot of phone calls years ago. You can get more information than maybe you could get in the past. And so I gather a little each day, and I keep a file, and the file grows. And I have a process that I go through on Saturday, and I spend virtually the entire day Saturday writing it. But it's how many hours it takes to put it all together, I don't know. But it some days it goes quickly, some days not so quickly, and the writing part is almost always the same. It's about 6 hours to write, and
Okay.
it's 2,400 words, which is 3 times the length of a regular column I would write for the Sun.
How did you feel about today's column that I happen to like a lot? Did you have columns that you don't like? Or did you like today's column? I thought there was just a ton of stuff in it.
We all, it's funny, we all write columns that we like. We all write columns that we're not so happy about. We all write, when you're writing, 10,000 columns in a career, you're not going to love every single one of them. Yesterday was a slow day for me. And I'm in Florida, and the weather is fantastic. And I wanted to get out into the weather, and I'm sitting and I'm going so slow, and my brain is not working. And so it took longer than usual yesterday. But at the end, I like I always look at the content matters to me a lot. Opinion is one thing, but the content really matters, because I want someone to read the column and say, I didn't know that, or that's a different view of that circumstance or that situation. And I think that's one of the reasons the column is so popular, or has been so popular for 30 plus years now, is that you can pick it up. It used to be 1 page, now it's 2. You can pick it up every week, and you're going to find things that maybe you hadn't heard before, or maybe you didn't know before, or viewpoints that you didn't know before. And I try and provide that on a regular basis. And I think it's the reason that it's sustained itself as well as it has for as long as it has. And there's nobody else, at least in Canada, doing that. And so it's kind of fun to be that guy. The general columnist is dying anyhow. We're the last of a breed. And to be that, I'm happy to be able to produce, at least on a weekly basis, the piece that is the most read in our newspaper. And the funny thing about it, there are people who don't know I write other days. Like, someone will come up to me and say, I love your Sunday. I said, well, what about Tuesday?
I gotta go back. How old are you?
I'm 68.
Okay, so I'm gonna go way back before you were born. I became a real crazy Maple Leaf fan. I became a Maple Leaf fan in 42, okay, but I became a really crazy Maple Leaf fan in 46, 47, because I found out that in Brooklyn I could subscribe to the Toronto Globe and Mail and get it the next day. And, that's my scrapbooks, which I still have, by the way. And I have to tell you, my first idol of columnist was Jim Coleman. But we'll get to talk about him later. The thing I'm getting at is I remember almost every year, starting in 46, 47, and 47, 48, and 48-49. At a certain point around this time of the season, there was always this question, what's wrong with the Maple Leafs? So now I got to ask it again. What is wrong with the Maple Leafs? They're the richest team in the NHL. They're always the richest team, and why can't they win the damn cup?
Well, first of all, being the richest team in a salary cap league is irrelevant, because all of the teams that are any good spend to the cap. Now it's a question of how do you spend to the cap and what happens with the people you spend to the cap. And there's always a period of time where you can find success. You know, the Leafs had that when Doug Gilmour and Wendell Clark and Dave Andreychuk and those guys played together, and that was a good team that didn't get to the cup. And they had a pretty good team with Lanny McDonald and Daryl Sittler and Boreas Salming. And there was this team called the New York Islanders and the Montreal Canadiens that were just a little bit better. And they won, I think, 8 Stanley Cups in a row. So that there was no window for that team. Well, the Leafs have had 9 years of what should have been a window. Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner and William Nylander and Morgan Riley and, you know, a group of pretty darn good hockey players that collapsed every year in the playoffs. So what makes somebody, why did Mike Bossy do what Mike Bossy did? Why did Trottier do what Trottier did? Why did Messier do? Because they were special when it mattered most. And what none of the current Leafs have been. And I think it's time where it's really this may be the worst position they've been in a decade. All of the guys you counted on to be special, and I see the lovely jersey up in the top corner representing the captain, who's not a very good leader, by the way, and he's not a very good player when it really matters. And so they had an opportunity with this group. I think the opportunity's gone, and now they're into that. You remember the Islanders after they won the 4th cup and then lost the 5th one to the Oilers? After that, they kind of faded into oblivion. I think the Leafs are right at the beginning of this fading into oblivion because they don't have any young players that you look at and say, this guy's going to be the next so-and-so. This guy's going to take his spot. They have a pretty good old hockey team when everyone is healthy and everyone is playing at top form, but everyone isn't healthy and everyone isn't playing at top form. And there's seemingly a division now between coach and players, which, you know, I think is more of a reflection of the players than it is of the coach. But this mix just doesn't work, especially, and I'm going to say something really strange, especially because Chris Tanev has been hurt all year. And Chris Tanev was a hugely important player on this team. And when they lost him, they kind of lost their way.
I'm going to turn this over to my buddy T-Bag in a minute, but I just want to follow up in one way. And that is, as I look at the Leafs from an Eastern viewpoint, there are 2 things that stand out to me. And that is the goalkeeping has never looked like it's a winning goaltending, which of course the Islanders had with Billy Smith and the Canadians had with Dryden. And the second thing was, from a personal viewpoint, as soon as they got John Tavares, as my Aunt Lottie would say, as soon as they got Tavares, I said, "Och and vey," because I saw plenty of Tavares up close. That's French for "och and vey." Aunt Lottie had a couple of good ones, but he was the captain of the Islanders, but it wasn't like this. There's a story. He's a young, very successful Jewish doctor in New York, and he makes a good living, and he buys himself a yacht, and he goes to Abercrombie and Fitch, and he buys a captain's outfit, and he brings his mother and father onto the yacht, and they're sailing up the Hudson River under the GW Bridge, and he turns to his pop and he says, "Pop, what do you think of your son David, the captain?" And Pop says, "David, by you're a captain." And
I know this one already.
But by a captain,
You're a captain, you're no captain.
And that's the way I felt about Tavares, but I say go back. The goaltending in Tavares to me was two of the things that kept the team from winning, no matter what Tavares did.
I liked the combination of Joseph Wall and Anthony Stolars. I like that. It's kind of Resch Smithish to me, but both guys can't stay healthy, and both guys are not dependable. And a coach told me many years ago, what do you want from your goalie more than anything else? You want your goalie to be dependable. That means it's Thursday night and you're playing, and I know you're in net. Well, this whole season for the Leafs, Anthony Stolars has some mystery injury. Joseph Wall had some mystery ailment that kept him out for however long, a personal circumstance. And now Stolars is still out. Wall is just coming back. Dennis Hildeby's actually, strangely enough, has been pretty good in the games that he's played, even though he looked not very good last year in the times he got chances to play. So the goaltending hasn't been horrible this year, even though the stats look horrible. I don't think the goaltending's been horrible. When Wall's played, he's been pretty good. Hildeby's been pretty good. Stolar started the season well. When you can't play defense in the NHL, and by that I don't mean this is your defense. I mean play defense as a group of 5 players on the ice, and play defense in the, and the most important thing with defensemen in today's hockey, how do you get the puck from your defenseman to your forward? How quickly do you move the puck? The puck moving defenseman has become the most important the Quinn Hughes guys, Cale Makar, they're the most important players in the game now. So the Leafs, when you remove Tanev, who's a pretty good passer, but not an offensive threat, he plays on a pair with Jake McCabe, which is a really nice pair to play against anybody. Now you remove Tanev, and then Jake McCabe becomes the number 1 defense. He's not a number 1 defenseman. On no team anywhere will he be a number 1 defenseman. He's not a great puck mover. He's not a great defender. He's not, he's kind of a perfect partner for a really good defenseman. So they lose that. Morgan Riley is just lost. Got great skater, great offensive skills from the center ice line in. He's a pretty good player. From the center ice line back, he's a terrible player. He's a clue. I'm amazed that a guy as smart as him, as nice as him, as coachable seemingly as he is, has never learned how to play defense. He's always in the, he's what Scotty Bowman used to call a chaser. I hate guys who chase the puck. Morgan Riley's a chaser, which means he's always in the wrong position in his own zone. If you watch nothing more than highlights in the morning, and you watch the goals that are scored against the Leafs, every night there's 1 or 2 of them where Riley's just in the wrong place. He's on the wrong side of the guy. His stick is in the wrong position. He walked around last night in Nashville by a guy I don't even know his name, Evangelista or somebody. I mean, he looked like Mario Lemieux walking around Bork. I mean, and Riley just looked clueless. And unfortunately, he may be the nicest person that I have met in this era of Leaf hockey. Like, he's just a terrific man with a wonderful wife. He's married to an Olympic figure skating champion who, she's one of the great people of all time. So they're like the greatest couple ever, except he can't play defense.
You're accompanied by a guy who's got the hottest team in hockey, T-Bag. So come on and tell us what the hell is going on with the Canucks.
Yeah, it's been a crazy ride since the trade, since my heart was ripped out with a spoon. But yeah, you mentioned Jim Coleman, and I remember Jim Coleman when I very first got into reading about sports. His column was in the Province, along with Clancy Loringer and Jim Taylor. These guys were my heroes growing up. I loved reading their columns. Anyway, Steve, the biggest question I have for you, other than is Die Hard a Christmas movie, is Morgan Morgan Ri Morgan Riley, I'm so glad you said that, because I have a buddy who thinks that Erik Karlsson is the greatest defenseman who ever lived, and I keep trying to convince him that Erik Karlsson is a terrible defenseman. He's for his career, I think he's minus 125 or something crazy like that. And Morgan Riley reminds me a lot of Erik Karlsson. So,
Without
in your
without
opinion,
without the shot and without the ability to finish the way Erik Karlsson can finish. I believe Erik Karlsson got 100 points one year, and I can't remember what year it was, but I didn't vote for him for the Norris. I think he won the Norris that year. You get 5 votes on your ballot. And I said, I can't vote for a defenseman who's the best defenseman in the NHL, who, one, doesn't kill penalties, and two, can't play defense. And so, I have the same sort of view of you on that. I want to go back for a second. You mentioned Jim Coleman, who was a good friend of mine. I got to know him in Calgary when he was the PR man for the racetrack after his newspaper career had kind of come to an end. And, what a gentleman, what a terrific writer, what a mentor. I grew up in probably the greatest time to grow up as a newspaper guy in Canada. I'm 22, 23 years old. Milt Dunnell and Jim Proudfoot are writing for the Toronto Star, and Dick Beddoes and Scott Young are writing for the Globe and Mail, and Trent Frayne is writing in Toronto, and Red Fisher's writing in Montreal, and Taylor and Coleman and Archie McDonald and all those guys are writing in Vancouver. And Edmonton later had the best 1-2 columnist combination in Canada with Terry Jones and Cam Cole. And everywhere you went, you just learned from being around all of these people who I got to know all of them. And I wouldn't say they were my friends, but I was the sponge trying to suck up as much of their information as I could. And I became, Jim Taylor and I, right until his passing, would regularly correspond. To me, he owned Vancouver for all that time he was there. He owned that market, and the way Milt Dunnell sort of owned Toronto right up until his, late 90s.
Milt Dunnell gave me a big break. I was writing for the New York Journal American, which was Hearst's evening paper, but I had been in hockey a fair amount after I worked for the Rangers in 54, 55, and somehow or other he asked me to drop him some hockey notes from New York, and he started to pay me for the notes, and then I wound up being their regular New York correspondent, doing politics and everything. But Milt was a great guy. But there was, and going back to Coleman, as I was beginning to say, he was my idol. And so I'm reading the Globe and Mail from 46, 47 season. He wrote hilarious stuff. I remember, Turk Broder was the great Leaf goalie, but he had a gimmick that he ran every once in a while. It was called the Coleman Thought Recording Machine, and it was like telling us what these guys were thinking. And he did a classic one about Broder, and the point was that Turk was a lousy skater. And he's got Turk coming out of the, coming onto the ice, and Turk is saying to myself, "I hope nobody sees that I'm hanging on to the boards." But he was great. I did meet him once. I was very, very, and I told him, of course, how much I loved him. And you mentioned Trent Frayne, another great guy. I met him when he was covering one of the Yankees World Series. We met at Toots Shor's, another great guy. And of course, Scott Young, who ghosted Connie Smythe's book. But there was another guy. He was like a sleeper. He came out of Guelph. His name was Rex McLeod.
Rex McLeod is the most underrated sports writer in Canadian history,
There
and
you go.
maybe the most talented.
You're right.
Um,
That's
but
right.
he didn't have push or an ego to sort of become what he should have become. And his son Robbie, covered the Blue Jays for years and just retired, I think, a year or two ago. But Rex had a pre-written story on Harold Ballard. He wrote an obituary prior to Harold dying. And I think his lead was "The fat is in the fire."
Oh my God. Well, like I said, Rex could cover a Leaf practice and make it a great read because he was funny. He was another guy
Yeah.
who was funny, like he was talking about. One line was Alan Stanley wasn't skating; he was snowshoeing. And if you'd seen Alan Stanley,
That's how he skated.
right?
Well,
Oh,
you
but the other guy, Steve, who I discovered late, was Taylor.
in Vancouver?
Yeah,
Oh, Taylor was Taylor's genius was football. Taylor was a brilliant football columnist and funny,
that's
really
it.
funny.
That's the whole deal.
Very clever. It's funny, hockey wasn't his thing or his love, which is odd for a Canadian columnist because we usually get roped into that kind of thing. But Taylor was tight with the Gretzkys. He got to know Wayne very early, and they forged a relationship. And I think he wrote Walter Gretzky's book, if I'm not mistaken. And Jim Taylor had the story broken that Wayne Gretzky was going to the LA Kings out of Edmonton, and he was sworn to secrecy on it and couldn't write it. And he knew about it before. And then the story gets broken, and everyone's saying, "Oh yeah," but poor Jim had to sit back and honor his relationship. But he knew about it. He was the first to know, and if you want to call it that. And I still miss the emails I would get. He'd find a column of mine or something that he liked, and he would send it to me, and with always a real nice note. So I enjoyed that so much. I want to go back to Milt for 1 second. I got a chance because I did a lot of boxing over the years, and Milt did a lot of boxing over the years, to do a bunch of fights together. And um, we're going to Vegas, and we're late for the big press conference that's being satellite shown all over the world. And Angelo Dundee is at the microphone talking. I think he was Sugar Ray Leonard's manager at the time, and Leonard was fighting somebody. And Milton and I walk in late to this press conference, and it's one of those ballrooms with like 50 tables. It looks like a wedding kind of setup. And Milton and I walk in, and at that point in time, Milt was not walking real fast. Like, I think his body was pretty broken down in his 80s. And he's walking across, and Angelo stops the press conference and says, "Wait, Milt Dunnell just arrived. I'm going to let him get a seat before, I'm going to continue." That's the kind of respect that Milt had around the world. And one of the things that I enjoyed, there was a lot of boxing in Atlantic City, and Milt hated flying. So you had to fly to Philly. And then if you wanted to get a flight to Atlantic City, you could, but you could rent a car at Philly Airport and drive to Atlantic City in about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. And so what we would do is we would fly to Philly together, and then we would drive the 2 hours or whatever it was, to our hotel. And the greatest thing for me was I just said, like, "Milt, tell me about," and I would spend the next hour and a half, listening to amazing stories from a different time. He was in that Muhammad Ali inner circle with Dave Kindred and Jerry Eisenberg, and I'm thinking of other guys that might have been in that group. It was a very small, tight group, maybe 6 or 8 writers. They went to Ali's room, the day before the fight. They were in his inner circle. And Milt was one of those guys, and he would tell phenomenal. And every single time I went to a fight, whenever I saw Angelo Dundee, first thing out of his mouth, "How's Milt now?"
Speaking of fights, and speaking of Dick Young, as we were before, Dick Young broke in, as far as I was concerned, and I have one of his pieces on my wall. In 42, 43, in the middle of the war, we had a great hockey team that played in the Eastern League. It was called the Coast Guard Cutters out of Baltimore. And the guy who ran that Coast Guard station was a former player from Minnesota, minor league guy. He became the commander. And what he did was he invited these hockey guys to join the Coast Guard. Art Coulter, who was a Hall of Famer for the Rangers, was on the team. Johnny Mariucci was on the team from the Blackhawks, and they had guys from, good minor league players. But the whole point, and I had a great Jewish defenseman named Manny Kotlow. Kotlow and Mariucci were like the two toughest guys I ever saw in defense in my life. They beat the crap out of anybody. But the thing was, Dick Young loved these guys because they were always fighting. And he covered this is not the Rangers, this is the Eastern Hockey League. But he gave them the name. One time he called them Hooligans Navy. The other time he said, I hope Mike Jacobs comes to see these guys because he can book them for the Friday night fights as well as playing hockey.
So were they tougher? Were they tougher than Larry Zeidel?
Larry Zeidel would be in that, but Larry was definitely. He's a buddy of mine. I was pretty damn close to Larry. I loved Larry, but I tell you, Mariucci, Kotlow, Mariucci, Coulter, and they had some terrific guys. They had Ranger guys, Alex Motto. I mean, it was, and they had Star Spangled uniforms. They used to bring the 30-piece Coast Guard band to the Garden. Benny Goodman's brother played in that band, and when the Coast Guard scored, which they often did, they'd bust into Semper Paratus, the Coast Guard marching song. It was like another world. Great stuff. That's all.
Those old Jewish hockey players would be amazed to see today's NHL with Jeremy Swayman and Adam Fox and the three Hughes brothers. And I'm missing a whole bunch, but there's about 10, right? Oh, Zach Hyman. There's about 10 of them, and they can almost have an all-star team, just the best of that group.
You wrote about the trade.
Yeah, the trade with the Vancouver, Minnesota trade is the first time that I know of that a Jewish hockey player was traded for a Jewish hockey player. That's just, we don't see a lot of hockey. As my wife said, we don't have a lot of hockey players named Ziv. In my neighborhood, I do, but not hockey players.
Isn't Vancouver doing much better now after the trade, Teabag?
4-0. Yeah, they haven't lost since they're on a 5-game road swing, and they beat the Rangers, Devils, and Islanders, and then last night they snuck out a win against the Bruins. So game that I felt they didn't really deserve to win, but they did it. Sometimes you get on a roll and you win games you're not supposed to, and now they play fit. Yeah. They play Philly on Monday, so against Talkett. So that'll be an interesting game. Steve, you mentioned that.
Let me just touch on this. It's such a Vancouver thing to do that they trade their best player away. They're almost in last place in the NHL when they do that. They have a chance to get, this generational player that's coming out of this year's draft, and the idiots go in the wrong direction. Now they're going to wind up with a crappy draft pick and a mediocre team, and the cycle goes on and on. This was the perfect year to fold. They're not folding.
Yeah, exactly. It's their annual drive for ninth. So,
Steve, when you look at the Leafs right now, what do? Stay the course, or is it time to seriously consider a reset, a tank?
They're caught in a really sort of unique circumstance. They don't own their first draft pick, but the pick is protected. So if they fold and get a top 5 pick, it's worth doing. But if they fold and don't get a top 5 pick, which is possible with the lottery being the way it is, then it's really a wasted year and a lost opportunity. And the Boston Bruins will be doing, cartwheels of excitement because nobody saw that team doing anything this year. And suddenly they're, typical Bruins, they're doing things that aren't possible and doing them again. So the Leafs are really caught here because your best player, who's the second highest paid player in the entire sport, is a dog. And he hasn't, other than having two of the most amazing seasons you're ever going to see. I mean, just phenomenal scoring seasons he had. He's now, as I wrote this morning, he's not a top 15 center in the NHL. So when you're paying, and he's back next year, and Tavares is back next year, and Riley's back next year. So tanking is a great idea if it works. But if it doesn't work, makes things worse. And so they're caught now. They're caught. I think they're right at the end of a 10-year window of opportunity that is now closing.
What if we got McKenna? I mean, like hypothetically speaking, would that make a difference?
Well, I mean, you look at Celebrini right now. Look at and the kid in Chicago.
Bedard?
You know, those guys change teams. And they're going, I think you're going to see Celebrini in the Olympics. I'm not sure Bedard's going to be there, but I think you're going to see Celebrini there. And this guy is third. Last I checked, he was third in the NHL in scoring, behind two frickin' all-time legends, Connor McDavid and McKinnon. So you're sitting there with these are phenomenal guys in year 13 and year 11. I mean, Connor McDavid does things we've never seen before. Some people say he might be the greatest player ever. I don't put him there yet, but he does things that no one else has ever done, which makes it amazing to watch. And Celebrini's like, 3 points behind them. So it tells you where he's at. So yeah, if you can get a guy, and if you think he's going to be one of those guys, yeah, that's a huge difference maker. Because in today's game, you need youth. And I mean, look at the Rangers, for example. They've got all those really good old players who aren't so really good anymore. And it means that when you get to that point, it's really hard to get going again. And I think the Leafs are in for about a 5-year fall. And I don't know if Brad Treliving will be around to be the person, putting that team together. And I suspect that Craig Berube won't be around to be the coach. And it's funny because as Stan well knows, you come across a lot of general managers. Sometimes you don't like them. Sometimes you like them. Sometimes they're great guys. Sometimes they're creeps. It changes all the time. Brad Treliving is one of the great people. He's just a terrific man. I wish he was a terrific general manager, which he hasn't proven yet to be. But I'm always hopeful for him because I like him so much. I mean, Lou Nanne was kind of that way in Minnesota. Lou Nanne was as great a guy as a great storyteller and a guy I've been around in hockey, and he just he had a very short run with a good Minnesota North Stars team, and just all toppled on him, and he never really recovered from it, and they wound up moving to Dallas. But that happens sometimes. Great guys don't always win. Sometimes the bastards like Glenn Sather win.
Didn't Nanny, wasn't he managing the team in '81 when they went to the finals?
Yeah, that looked like a great team on the rise, and they never rose. It was like that was their moment. That was it. And even in that final, they weren't really a contender in the final. The Islanders it was like the Islanders had those easy finals. They had Vancouver and they had Minnesota, and they won cups against teams that a lot of teams could have won cups against, but they were just better than everybody else. But that Minnesota team with Bobby Smith and Neil Broughton and Dino Ciccarelli and Craig Hartsburg and Gilles Meloche, and they had a great lineup. That should have been a good team for a long time, and it petered out quickly. My favorite Lou Nanne story, they had a player named Frank Beaton. I don't know if you remember that name.
Yes, I do.
He was a fighter whose nickname, by the way, was Seldom.
Right.
As in seldom beaten. and Frank Beaton was playing for the Birmingham, whatever the American Hockey League team or International Hockey League team was playing in Birmingham. And the North Stars and the Islanders switched farm club cities. And so he wound up staying in Birmingham, but he had to get traded from one team to the other. So Nanny calls up Bill Torrey and says, "Do you want Frank Beaton?" And Frank Beaton says, "Well, what do I want Frank Beaton for? He's like an old minor league fighter. Like, what do I do?" He sells tickets in Birmingham. You'll be good. What am I going to give you? I can't give you anything for Frank Beaton. He says, "How about this? Next time I'm in New York, dinner at the Palm." So, and he said to Lou, you write it up. So they send in the trade, Frank Beaton to the New York Islanders for dinner at the Palm. Brian O'Neill, I believe, was the registrar at the time.
Yeah.
He calls back for the NHL register. He's got to register trades. He calls back and says, "You can't trade a player for dinner. Like that's not legal." So a couple of days go by. Frank Beaton to the New York Islanders for future considerations. And he played his last season, I believe, of the. If you did a hockey DB on Frank Beaton, you'd find out how many penalty minutes he probably had in his final season in Birmingham. I bet you it's in the 300 range.
We had a very terrific writer, who was a colleague of mine for a while at the Journal American, Jimmy Breslin. And when Jimmy left us, he went to the Tribune. He write a column every once in a while. People he hates, but he didn't use the word hate. People I don't want to see anymore. But who would be the top guy, top hockey guy on the Simmons don't like list?
Oh boy, probably Sather. He would be up there. As a manager, I'm trying to think of them. There must have been coaches I didn't get along with, but I'm just trying off the top of my head. It's a hard one to answer.
What didn't you like? What didn't you like about Sather?
Sather played games with people, and he chose his favorites and he chose his enemies, and he played it all out as it was a piece of theater. I was covering the Calgary Flames. Hockey in the 1980s was never better than when Edmonton and Calgary were great. I think those series and those battles of Alberta, in the period of time from like 1980 to 1987, was just phenomenal hockey. Well, I'm the guy who I started as the beat writer covering the Flames, and then I'm the columnist for the Calgary Herald. Well, I became his punching bag, so to speak. Say there was a post-game press conference, I would ask a question, and he would start with, "Make sure you're getting this down right," and then go from there. And him and he was always accusing me of misquoting him. And so what I did after a period of time, I don't remember how many years, is I went to our library. In those days, you had phenomenal newspaper libraries. And I said, "Find me every quote that I've used regarding Glenn Sather for the last 5 years." And what I did was I printed the thing out. I got all the quotes. I highlighted the quotes with yellow pen. I mailed it to him, asking the question, "Where have I misquoted you?" Most of the quotes were, "We played well tonight," and things, absolute innocuous kind of quotes. Needless to say, I never got a response. And he was never one of my favorite guys. But I think he looked and said, "That guy matters in Calgary. We're Edmonton, therefore I'm going to, go at him." And that's what he did. And at the same time, it's funny, Bob Johnson was the Flames coach in their best years in Calgary. And Bob Johnson's one of the greatest hockey coaches I've ever seen. Maybe he might be the great. I mean, I put Scotty in a different world than everybody else, and maybe Al Arbor in a different world. But after those two guys, Bob Johnson's as great as a coach as I've ever seen. And he had an amazing skill to take an average to poor hockey player and make a middle of the roster to top of the roster. He had a little problem with his best players. But the Jamie McCowans, the Colin Pattersons, the Joel Ottos, guys who may not have otherwise played in the NHL had great careers because of Bob Johnson. Al McGinnis went to the Hall of Fame because of Bob Johnson. Like when Al McGinnis came to the Flames' first camps, he had a slap shot and nothing else. He didn't know how to play. He didn't know how to play defense. Gary Roberts, another guy, learned from Badger Bob. He just had an incredible way to teach. And I don't know anybody, I think, in the NHL today, other than Joel Quenneville and probably Rod Brindamore, who have that ability to teach on a regular basis the way he did.
What's your prediction for the Stanley Cup? What team do you think is going to win it all?
I think this is Colorado's time, whether they continue to play this great all the way through. But I was looking at the numbers the other day, and I know plus minus, people don't like plus minus anymore, and it doesn't matter that much. And I still use it as not a basis of throughout the league, but I use it as a team by team stat. Because if you're all playing on the same team, and you've got Nathan McKinnon, and he's plus 43
Wow.
in 34 games.
Wow.
Hello, let's give him a Hart Trophy now. We'll probably give him a Stanley Cup in June. That's the team with the best forward and the best defenseman all at once, and the rest of the team kind of plays out nicely with everybody else. I think they're the best team in a league that doesn't have very many great teams this year.
How about Las Vegas?
Las Vegas is a tough team to play. They have a complete roster. They have a really good outfit. They have a very good coach, but they lost one guy who's irreplaceable, and that's Alex Pietrangelo. And when they won the cup, as he was in Alex Pietrangelo in 2019 with St. Louis, and a few years later with Vegas, probably should have won the Conn Smythe Trophy both times. Those kind of 28-minute defensemen in the playoffs are so valuable. Their defense is okay now, but it doesn't have a Pietrangelo. And you'd notice it. Alex was funny. He didn't have the best seasons every year. He wasn't the greatest regular season player. But when the lights came on in April and May, he was a guy who knew how to win. And there's very few of those guys around. And I think how do they replace him? I don't think you can. And so that's where I think Vegas falls off comparatively with Colorado. Colorado's got Makar and the pair of Makar and Taves, which is the best pair in hockey.
What about Stars?
And
We're playing
that's
Stars
what the Leafs
tonight.
are lacking.
See, the Stars, each year, I think this is their year. And I'm going to also put a personal side of this. I love Jim Nill. I've known Jim Nill. I covered Jim Nill on the 1980 Canadian Olympic hockey team. That's how far we go back. I got to know him when he scouted with Ottawa. I got to know him when he scouted with Detroit. He's just I think we're the same age. He's just one of those people that when you meet him, he's genuine, he's real, he understands his job, and he puts together a great team year after year after year. And I think they're the best drafting team in the NHL. Like year after year, they bring in, whether it's Wyatt Johnson or whoever. They always have a young guy. The one they traded last year to Carolina, for Rantanen. Jim Nill's just a great operator. But I don't know what's happened to that team in the biggest games at playoff time. And I'm a Pete DeBoer fan too, by the way. Pete DeBoer and Steve Spott, who's now in Boston. They had a great coaching staff. They have a very good goaltender in Ottinger. They have Miro Heiskanen, who's a top 5 NHL defenseman. And so that team should be, right there. But the difference between, and I find this one when I watch them in playoff times in games that matter, where McDavid can, in a 1-1 game, do something stupid and win the game, and McKinnon can do that. They don't have really one of those kind of centers. Now, Rantanen's a winger. He's pretty good at it. But they don't have one of those kind of centers that can take over a series. And I think that's where the Dallas Stars have kind of fallen short each year. They're there, they're close, they're pounding on the door. One of these years it's going to happen for them. And this is a really good team they have right now. But I still think Colorado is kind of in a place by itself.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about the coaches. A lot of blame falls on Berube, and there's predictions he's going to get fired soon. What do you think? How much blame should actually be placed on a coach? And is it even fair?
There's things coaches can change, and there's things coaches can't change. One of the things coaches can change, for example, are special teams. Because special teams are, you see teams that have mediocre to above average players that have good power plays, and you see teams that have exceptional offensive players that don't have good power plays. I love to watch Tampa on the power play because Nikita Kucherov is the best power play player probably that I've seen in 20 years. He's just exceptional at it, and he moves the puck and he finds guys and he passes the puck and he's wonderful to watch. The Leafs should have the last 5 years with Matthews, and when Marner was there and Nylander's there, and now Matthew Nyes, and they should have a great power play. They're 31st in the NHL right now. Is that Craig Berube's fault? I think it's Mark Savard's fault. But who hired Mark Savard? Craig Berube. So it's apples and oranges kind of thing. I think Craig Berube is a very honest, decent, middle of the road NHL coach. That's who I think he is. And I think he did a great job with this team last year until game 5 and game 7 against the Panthers. They went 7 games. The only team that went 7 games was the Stanley Cup champions, and they finished first for the first time in I don't know how many years in the Atlantic Division. So they had a good year. But I don't know if his style of hockey is modern. Is what today's game is helping his better players. I mean, I ran a note this morning about Matthews' 95 games playing for Berube. I think he has 47 goals. In his 95 games playing for Sheldon Keefe, he was like 80 goals. So, is that coaching? Is that how you use your players? Coaches can control certain things, but once the game starts, coaches have less control once the game starts than most sports. A football coach has a lot of control in a football game. A basketball coach is forever running the play and calling the timeouts. Baseball, you're managing every pitch. Hockey's so random. Hockey is the most random game. So you can do what Scotty did, which was run your bench better than anybody else did and understand your players better than anybody else did and put the right guys in the right spot all the time. There's an art to that. Pat Burns was tremendous at that, for example. But I don't think Berube is an upper echelon going to the Hall of Fame kind of. He's one of those all-time great coaches. But I also don't hold him responsible for players who aren't performing. I mean, there's a reason Austin Matthews is the second highest paid player in the league. He deserved to be that when he signed the deal. And then now the responsibility is, go out there and play. Be great. Live up to your salary. Live up to the captaincy they've given you. He hasn't done that. Is that the coach's fault? Maybe, but I don't blame the coach for that. And he's going to get fired. It's just, is he going to get fired in the next 2 weeks, or is he going to get fired at the end of the season? But he's going to get fired.
I'm going to give you 2 examples why the Avalanche are not going to win the Cup. Start with the 48-49 Leafs. They just about sneaked into the 4th place. Red Wings ran away with 1st place. They were like the Avalanche now. And in the finals, this Leaf team that was an under 500 team, they beat the Red Wings in 4 straight. Now, I remember somebody asked Howie Mika, how could that have happened? And he said, people misunderstood us all season. We were a lot better team than people thought they were. But the point is, this is a team under 500 goes and beats the best team in 4 straight. Then I go to the Leafs of Imlach, who half the guys hated this guy. Then they wind up winning this the last cup that the Leafs won. They beat the Canadiens, for crying out loud. And, I mean, the Canadians were heavily favored. And Imlach wins the cup with these old guys. It's unbelievable.
It's
So
it's
that's
such
why I say, Steve, beware of the sleeper.
yeah. I'm always be wearing a sleeper. The LA Kings did it with Daryl Sutter when they made the playoffs right at the end of the season that one year, and they snuck in. It happens less and less now. It happened a lot in the 6-team NHL. And I want to ask you a question though, Stan. You said half of the players hated Imlach. I want to know the half that liked him
Well,
because
the old
I haven't
guys
heard
liked him.
I haven't heard too many other than maybe Red Kelly that did.
Yeah.
Because
Well, even that, I mean, how does the team win the cup? And they lost 10 straight in the home stretch that season when Imlach went into the hospital, whatever it was, a nervous breakdown. That was a miraculous cup win with all the tourists that they had.
one of my favorite interviews in recent years, the Leafs were playing Montreal in the playoffs, which doesn't happen very often. And I thought to myself, who is the greatest player to have played for both the Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens? And the answer was easy, Frank Mahovlich. And so I called up Frank Mahovlich, and Frank does not do very many interviews, and he's not a public guy, and he's not around. He doesn't show up at things. He's not one of those guys who I was, the Wendell Clark, Daryl Sittlers, they're there for every, Leaf occasion. Frank distanced himself. So I called him up, and at first he didn't want to talk at all. And I said, why don't we just see how this goes? And, and so we talked, and then when he warmed up, he just couldn't stop. And a lot of it was about how much he could not stand Punch Imlach and how much Punch Imlach almost ruined his career. And his father once put Punch Imlach up against the wall, like was ready to punch him because he kept intentionally mispronouncing his name. He would call him Mihalovich, and that would drive the family crazy. So he goes in. I write the story. I'm really happy with the story. I'm really happy with the interview. The next morning, about 10 o'clock in the morning, my phone rings. Now, I've spoken to Frank Mahovlich once in my life. This is the only interview we've ever done. I maybe have met him at things, but I didn't really know him at all. Phones me at 10 o'clock the next morning. Frank Mahovlich here. I just want to tell you, the story was fantastic, and my phone hasn't stopped ringing since the morning, and my email is going crazy, and everybody's calling, and everybody's, and so when you get one of those, those interviews, you kind of, you're not the one who's telling the stories. It's the guy telling the stories. But I love to talk to some of the old guys. I talk to Dick Duff quite often. He's a character. But that Mahovlich's a really bright guy. Do you know he has the record for most points in a playoff season for the Montreal Canadiens? You think Guy Lafleur, Jean Beliveau, Rocket Richard, Mahovlich has the most points in a playoff year.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
I wanted to ask you about Brian Burke. How did you get along with
he'd
him?
be on my list of least favorite people. He might be the captain, actually, now that you think about it. It's funny thing with Brian Burke and I got along great for about 25 years. And I played a small part in his coming to the Maple Leafs. I had been called by someone involved with the Leafs to find out whether 5 different guys in the NHL had interest in being their next general manager. They couldn't contact them because that's tampering. So I made calls to 5 different people, the names of whom you would all know, and asked each of them, would you be interested in being general manager of the Leafs? You could probably get a 5-year deal at $3 million a year, which was more money than any of them were making at the time. And 4 of them said no. And Brian Burke was like, where do I sign up? He was in Anaheim at the time, and I think they were on their way to winning the Stanley Cup. And it was like his kids were in the Boston area, and he wanted to be closer to home, and this was his opportunity. And yes, he got the job. and he got the big contract and he got the deal. And a few years later, I wish I could tell you years, but years, go in and out of my brain really easily. It's July 1st, free agent day in the NHL. The Leafs are, I believe, the 29th place team out of 30. And Brian Burke goes to Afghanistan on a Canadian Army Goodwill tour on the day of free agency. And they're paying Brian Burke $3 million to run the Leafs, and he's off shaking hands with soldiers. And as I wrote in the column about it, there's 365 days in a year. There's 364 you could go on that trip. The one you can't is July 1st. And I wrote a column about that. And before this, we had made an arrangement because we knew there was going to come a time when one of us was going to be, fighting with the other one. We made an arrangement that we were going to be men about this, and we were going to shake hands and say, when we get to that point, we'll find a way to settle through it. So he sends me one of those, when you get a text that's so long, it has to go into the next text. Yeah. So he sends me one of those texts that needs to be repeated. I wish I had kept it, by the way. And just what a effing, I am for this, and that he had, people in charge, and they were fine, and they were doing their job, and we didn't miss anything, and I had a cell phone, and blah blah blah, and just went crazy at me. And I wrote back, "What about our agreement?" And he very short text. The next one was "F the agreement." And that's the last time actually we ever communicated. And on the day he got fired, he had a press conference, which is rare for a guy who gets fired, but he decided he wanted to have a press conference that day. And I asked the question, and his answer was, the only good part about getting fired is I don't have to talk to you any longer. Which at the time, it was the quote that got play all over the radio and television and whatever. And I was thinking, sometimes you don't come up with a really good response until too late. I'm driving home when I came up with, I haven't spoken to you in a year and a half, so why does it matter? But I was in the car by the time that happened, and didn't have a chance to say it. But I see him all the time. He gives me the evil eye, and I give him the evil eye because he's in the press box a lot at Leaf games. And he's not one of my favorite people, and I'm not one of his.
Okay, we're running out of time. Maeve, do you have a joke for us?
I was going to. Well, you reminded me of a story. The joke is this guy goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Sam, you're going to live to be 60." He says, "Well, I am 60." The doctor says, "Well, what did I tell you?" But I want to tell you a true story because I'm from Brooklyn, and I covered the World Series in '55 when the Dodgers won the series, and then I covered the series the next year when the Yankees. Dodgers went to 7 games, and I was at the 7th game. It was a bitter cold, and Newcomb was pitching for Brooklyn, and Berra knocked the crap out of him in the first inning. A home run, and then in the 3rd inning, the final score was 9-0 for the Yankees. It was just a crushing thing, and Berra was the big culprit to us and the hitter. So now we switched to long time after that, and I came out with a hockey book, one of my favorites, called Metro Ice, and I had the book signing at Berra's museum. Berra and I became good friends because I was covering the Devils, and Yogi was friends with Dr. McMullen, who owned the Devils. So I see Yogi a lot, and I worked out a deal that we'd have the book signing at Yogi's museum, which was a great day. But I got there an hour early, and who do I run into but Yogi? We're just standing there schmoozing, and I said, I got to tell you something. I covered that World Series in '56, and because of you, not only did you crush me and break my heart, but you broke the hearts of 2 million other Brooklynites. And he looks at me and he says, "You know something, Stan? I'm still not sorry." My story for tonight.
And by the way, I have gotten to be friends with his granddaughter, Lindsay, who's a wonderful lady and a very good sports writer.
And she's kept alive the spirit of Yogi.
They did a great job on that documentary.
Yes, he was terrific.
Yeah.
I hated the Yankees, but I couldn't hate Yogi because he was he was so great. Later on, hanging out with McMullen, they were great. So anyhow, that's my story. And listen, pal, thanks for coming.
I've enjoyed this a lot.
Thank you. Yeah.
I gotta get this out because there's a reporter in the East. I don't remember who it is, but he ended up in Atlanta with his kid, and he decided that he was going to knock on Muhammad Ali's door, and
Yep.
because he heard the chant "Love People." Do you remember who that was?
Oh yeah, it was Stephen Brunt.
Stephen Brunt. That's right.
And
then
he went to Ali's farm in Michigan. And he knocked on the door, and Ali took him in and took pictures with the kids and played tricks, and he was doing magic and that kind of stuff in those days. And one of the great gracious athletes to be around. That I've been fortunate enough to see him after his career. But Brunt, who was a phenomenal boxing writer and one of the great Canadian columnists when he was writing for the Globe and Mail. And he wrote a piece about it, and to this day it's one of those delightful kind of stories that you wish you had done it, or wished you had been the person who was knocking on the door.
He told that story on TSN after Muhammad Ali had passed away, and about how his kid was playing street hockey with the champ, and I had tears in my eyes. It just was so beautiful.
Well, it's funny. One of my best friends, Muhammad Ali, was coming to Toronto to do color commentary on a debacle where George Foreman was fighting 5 guys in a Saturday afternoon, and they were televising it on Wide World of Sports. And so it was 3 5-round fights against 5 different opponents for Foreman. And my buddy was maybe 16 at the time. He's the biggest Ali fan in the world at the time. He goes down to the Park Plaza Hotel. He knocks on, finds out what room Muhammad Ali's in somehow, knocks on the door. He's got a reel-to-reel tape recorder. He tells Ali's wife, who answers the door, that he's a reporter and he's here to interview the champ. And he's 16. He probably looks 11. Like, it's not exactly fooling anyone. She's charmed by him. She invites him in. Ali gives him like half an hour of tape for his thing, including like say things to my brother, just things like that. And it's a phenomenal tape. He's since been digitalized and all that, but he's got this thing. Not only did he get the half an hour with Ali, but Ali sent a limo to his house that day to have him join him at ringside for that fight at Maple Leaf Gardens. Those kind of stories don't come around very often.
Right.
Oh, God.
Thanks again, pal.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe to Bottle Rocket, whatever you get your podcast, and we'll catch you next time. And happy holidays.
Happy Hanukkah.
See ya, people.
Happy
Thank
Hanukkah.
you.
Thank you so much.
Be well, Stan.